Glory to Jesus Christ, and welcome back. Sorry for the cheesy intro. It's all I had. Anyway, today we're going to talk about asceticism, rugged individualism, and a rightly ordered society. And this is really the last of a series of lectures that began 2 weeks ago when we talked about ontological individualism, and then last week on sort of the anti or the post-liberal tendencies in some in Orthodox social thought. Before we get into the lecture, just a reminder, November 9th, Saturday, November 9th, we have a video conference scheduled for 3 o'clock Eastern, 2 o'clock Central, and 1 o'clock Mountain time. So that'll run about 50 minutes. And I have a baptism at 3:30, so my time is pretty constricted, so I will end on time. I've got essays. I got one from McCullough, one from Deacon Basil, and two from Father John. I'll get to those hopefully on Friday. Tomorrow I've got to finish an article for a journal in Germany, and then do a podcast with Father Anthony Perkins. Yay. It's nice to be loved. Anyway, let's get into today's lecture. And our goal here is to talk about the relationship between individualism and community within the context of Orthodox social ethics and American culture. We'll be emphasizing the importance. I'm going to move my notes a little bit so I can see them a little bit more easily. We'll be emphasizing the importance of communion, asceticism, and the role of church and state in fostering a rightly ordered society. So let me move on to the next slide here. And there we go. Okay, and let's pull that up so you can see the slide a little bit more closely. Well, these are the main themes that we're going to be talking about in this lecture. The human person as a microcosm and a macrocosm. What I mean by that is that for the fathers of the church, the human person is, as a microcosm, is sort of an embodiment of creation, a miniature embodiment of creation, and so of society. As a macrocosm, it's another way of saying that the human person holds the whole of creation within him or herself. This, again, one of the great things in Orthodox social ethics, Orthodox anthropology, is that we see the person in creation, the person in society, as all analogous. In other words, I can learn something about the human person by looking at creation or society, but I can also learn about creation and society by looking at the person. And this is important in our understanding of social ethics. Our ethics are not theoretical. They are grounded in the nature of creation and the nature of society, as those both reflect what it means to be human, but also how being a human person is reflected in society. We'll then move on. We'll also be talking about the church's role in a rightly ordered society. And what we're concerned with here is how the church contributes to a just social order through the lives and the relationships of the faithful, and how by our relationship with other people, with each other in the church and with those outside the church, we're able to foster communion between God, humanity, and different social communities. We'll then also be talking about ontological individualism and the common good, and that was that lecture 2 weeks ago. That was a little fuzzy. I apologize for that. I was taking medication for flu, so I was not doing great. But ontological individualism, if you remember, it's sort of typified or exemplified by the phrase "my truth," and this is the idea that the human person, that the only thing that we can know is ourselves and our own experience. Probably the quintessential phrase like that is "my truth." And what we talked about the 2 lectures ago, and we'll talk about again today, is how ontological individualism threatens the common good by causing us to focus inward, and doing so at the expense of genuine understanding between persons. We'll also talk about negative freedom and ascetic ethos. That is negative freedom, freedom from external constraints. And we're going to talk about how, while this is necessary, it's insufficient for the cosmic transfiguration to which, as Orthodox Christians, we are called. To really fulfill our vocation as Orthodox Christians, we not only need to be left alone or free from the coercive power of the state and social forces, but we also require ascetical effort so that our will can be reoriented towards God. And in being reoriented toward God, we become able to restore the bonds of creation. Then we'll talk about freedom of conscience and sin. And while we acknowledge in Orthodox social thought that conscience can be, freedom of conscience can be abused and leading to all sorts of harms and sin, we also need to accept the fact, or also Orthodox social ethics also emphasizes that sin is also the result of our internal coercion by desires. So it isn't just enough that we say we want to be left alone by the government. We also need to acknowledge that, yeah, a big cause of sinfulness in my life is frankly me. So what else are we going to talk about? Well, a little bit we'll touch on asceticism in American culture and how there is an ascetical component to American culture, which means that we're not only concerned with preventing the worst in human life, but also in fostering that which is best. And one of the things I'll argue is that the Orthodox ascetical tradition really does align with the American ethos or culture of self-restraint and civic responsibility. The last thing we'll touch on, major theme before the conclusion, is rugged individualism and Orthodox social ethics. And I'm going to wait to explain what I mean by that till we come to it in the lecture. So, but that all said, let's, if we can, just move on and let's review. Okay. All right. We saw earlier that communion between persons and communities is found in the human heart. The reason for this is that the human person is both a microcosm and a macrocosm of creation. Let me see if I can move. I can't really move. Let me make this a little bigger. What do we say in the Divine Liturgy before the recitation of the Creed? Let us love one another that we may confess with one mind, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Communion is the fruit of the human heart. Now, the reason we'll explain why that is in a moment, but this is, I think, the thing that is always the touchstone for Orthodox social ethics. There's that quote from John's first epistle: "Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God." To say that the person is a microcosm means that creation, and so society, is embodied in the human person. In some way, in the person, we see creation, society in miniature. As a macrocosm, the human person contains the whole of creation, and so again, society in him or herself. For Orthodox theology, the truth of the person and the truth of society are analogous. We can understand one by understanding the other. How the person functions, grows, and develops, the struggles and successes the person faces, all of these help us understand society. Likewise, if we understand society, we can all understand something of the human person. For the fathers of the church, and I'm thinking especially here of Augustine in, I think it's the City of God or his lecture on Christian morals, he draws a very clear parallel between how the person is ruled by reason and how society needs to be ruled by reason. So there's this parallel between what we expect of the person and what we expect to see in society. For both to be justly ordered means that both need to submit to reason. And by reason, he doesn't just mean abstract human reason, but the divine logos, the Son, who is himself divine reason. Hopefully that's making some sense to you. The church contributes to the right ordering of society in and through the life of the faithful. And we're still reviewing the last two lectures here. Clergy and the laity, by our relationships with other people, are able to foster communion between God and humanity, but also between persons and different human communities as well. So for example, in my own life, I'm an Orthodox priest. I'm part of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church USA. I'm a university chaplain, and I'm an academic psychologist. I do work in public policy and economics. And when I'm doing this kind of work outside the church as a chaplain or as a scholar, I'm often the very first Orthodox Christian, much less Orthodox priest, that most people have met. So my relationship with them actually works in a small way to establish some common ground and even some communion between that person and the church, or between the professional society that I'm working with and the tradition of the Orthodox Church. We really can't underestimate, I think, how important it is for a rightly ordered society that we have rightly ordered relationships and friendships with other people. Because it's precisely through their relationship with us that people are drawn into a relationship with Jesus Christ. And having been drawn into that relationship with Jesus Christ, they begin to reorder their own lives and how they relate, both to themselves and other people. Ontological individualism, on the other hand, is a threat to the common good, precisely because it closes the human heart in on itself. As we said in the 2 classes ago, probably the most common expression of ontological individualism is the phrase, my truth. We hear people say, I need to speak my truth, or we encourage a person to say, speak your truth. But again, we have to ask, is a truth that is only mine really true? What if truth is purely individualistic, if it's absolutely unique to the person, then truth doesn't become a common ground between us. In any case, in whatever form it takes, ontological individualism is simply another way of saying you're not the boss of me. It undermines the life of community by causing the person, again, to turn inward on himself. If truth is somehow my unique possession, if all I can know is my truth and all you can know is your truth, then we can't really know each other. So this is why phrases like, know your truth or speak your truth are really, however well-intentioned, detrimental to the life of the community. Again, is truth really only mine? And if it is really only mine, is it really true? Probably the easiest example I can think of is a private language. Long time ago, when I was a therapist, one of the things that was always so heartbreaking about people with sort of psychotic disorders is that they were trapped in a world of their own creation. The only thing they really knew was the delusions that were afflicting them. The phrase "my truth" is something like that. It's like a private language. It's something that is only meaningful to the person, and it has the unfortunate and tragic consequences, like a psychosis, like a private language, of making it impossible for the person to communicate to others, making it impossible for them to be understood by others, and so undermining the possibility of love and communion. So these phrases that we often hear are not just, we're not just concerned about them as abstract bits of theology or ethics. They really do have a practical effect on the life of the community and ultimately the life of the church. So, we have to be careful and thoughtful. We also saw that there is an unfortunate anti-liberal tendency in recent church teaching on social ethics. Both the basis of the social concept and for the life of the world, for example, appeal to the state to impose by law specifically morally desirable outcomes. In other words, what we see in both the basis of the social concept and for the life of the world is a willingness of people in the name of the church to say, hey, there's a good thing that needs to happen, and the state needs to make it happen, but in other words, the state needs to make it happen by coercion, because this is how fundamentally the state works. Now, there are different areas of concern. For the basis of the social concept, the idea is that the state should favor the Orthodox Church as a matter of custom and ideally even law. Unfortunately, in doing that, in favoring the Orthodox Church, this is something that has the consequences. It comes at the expense of other Christian or religious traditions. In other words, if the Orthodox Church has some sort of favored status in Russia, well, that's going to compromise the freedom and the ability of other religious traditions to function and to serve their own faithful and to live according to their own conscience. In For the Life of the World, the concern is somewhat different. This document calls on the state to end things like income inequality, but again, by appealing to the state to do this, the document is asking the state to compromise or impinge or impose upon the economic freedom of others. And again, no one is in suggesting in For the Life of the World, for example, that everything that's being done is necessarily immoral, but it does compromise human freedom. In both cases, what happens is the document sees an undesirable consequence and then proceeds to discuss this undesirable consequence as the cause, as having only one specific, easily identifiable cause. For the basis of the social concept, the lack of respect paid to the Orthodox Church in Russia is a result of the general apostasy of society. For the Life of the World, income inequality is the result of human greed. And while we don't want to minimize the harm of apostasy or greed, there is a question as to whether or not apostasy and greed are the only explanations for these undesirable circumstances. While we shouldn't not deny either the presence of apostasy or greed in human affairs, what doesn't happen is that neither document asks what must be done to change greedy hearts or to bring apostates to faith in Jesus Christ. Yes, as we said, government has a role to play in a rightly ordered society, but this is primarily a negative role of keeping, as we read in the basis, society from becoming hell. Even the best laws and the most just government cannot, and again, we read this in the basis, make society into the kingdom of God. And so this is the great irony here, is that in trying to use the law, use the state to make a just outcome, both documents inadvertently, unintentionally, with the best of intentions, set up a situation in which the government then might cause harm in one area while bringing about a good result in another area. So in any case, though, while negative freedom is important in the social realm, it's insufficient. And this is really the problem that we're getting to, is that in denigrating, minimizing the importance of negative freedom, of people being left free from government coercion, the documents inadvertently stray into illiberal areas. But we have to say, as Orthodox Christians, that negative freedom, while necessary, is not sufficient for the work of cosmic transfiguration to which we are called as Orthodox Christians. In other words, for me to do what Christ has called me to do, yes, I need to be left free by the government. I need to not be subject to unreasonable social coercion. But being left alone by the society or by the government is not enough. Fidelity to my vocation requires more than simply people leaving me alone. In For the Life of the World, we read that cosmic transformation requires great effort, a ceaseless striving against the fallen aspects of humanity and of the world, and the embrace of this labor requires an ascetic ethos, one that can reorient the human will in such a way as to restore its bonds with all of creation. Such an ethos reminds Christians that creation, as a divine gift from the loving Creator, exists not simply as ours to consume at whim or will, but rather as a realm of communion and delight in whose goodness all persons and all creatures are meant to share, and whose beauty all persons are called to cherish and protect. When you hear that, it's obviously, first of all, it's beautiful. It's quite beautiful, but it's also obviously much more than simply someone saying, "Don't tread on me." That great flag from the American Revolution. This vision that's sketched out in For the Life of the World, that of cosmic transformation, is really much more than just the government staying out of my business. In fact, in light of our vocation to participate in the transformation of the cosmos, negative freedom might seem just a little shallow, but it's not something that we can do away with. It is its own legitimate kind of freedom. It has its own value, but that value is not ultimate. But it does create a space for us to exercise our freedom in a more positive manner. And this is what we mean, or what the document means, by an ascetic ethos. The Christian life requires great effort and striving against the fallen aspects of our humanity. And we all know this from our own experience, our own personal experience, our own pastoral experience. An ascetic ethos is one which reorients the human will and restores its bond with creation and the Creator. Again, as we read in the document, creation is a divine gift, not just for consumption, but a realm of communion and delight to be cherished and protected. Let me give just a quick example. My first parish was in rural Northern California, a lovely part of the country, very beautiful, but also very poor. And a lot of the people who came into the church came from rather humble economic backgrounds, and they would often have a great deal of difficulty fasting. And the reason they had a difficulty fasting is because they weren't used to cooking. I mean, to be honest, they were used to fast foods and prepared foods, and for a variety of reasons, some economic, but mostly not. They just weren't used to fresh fruits and vegetables. And so one of the things I discovered is I had to teach them, and I enlisted some of my parishioners in doing this. I had to teach them how to cook, so that they knew that it was possible to keep the fast and to eat foods that were, nutritious and frankly tasty. Again, all they knew was McDonald's or canned soup. That's not a sufficient cooking background to fast. And so they learned how to cook. And along the way, in learning how to cook and learning how to make fasting foods, they also came to appreciate the taste and really the nutritional value of fresh fruits and vegetables. So anyway, after this had been going on for a year or so, St. Nicholas came to visit on St. Nicholas Day, and he passed out chocolate-covered gold chocolate-covered coins and oranges. To the amazement of the parents, their children who had grown up on junk food, basically fast food, skipped the chocolate, ate the orange. And the reason they ate the orange is because as their parents had fasted and as their diets had changed, the children had developed a taste for fresh fruit. They came to appreciate oranges more than chocolate. So there was this great reversal. They began to delight in creation. This is the goal of our asceticism, is that we learn to delight in creation, and not just the material world, but also the social world and one another. As I come to discipline my own desires and tendencies, I begin to see things about you that ordinarily I would just overlook, because whatever you're doing isn't satisfying, isn't meeting my self-centered desire of the moment. This is really how the ascetical tradition helps foster a just social order. All right, so let's move on if we can. Now, we do have to acknowledge right up front that the basis of the social concept is absolutely correct. The freedom of conscience can and often is abused to the harm of both the person and the common good. There's no question about it. That happens all the time. The thing is, though, because even that someone abuses the freedom of conscience doesn't mean that we should do away with the freedom of conscience. It still needs to be protected. It needs to be fostered. And one of the things that we need to be willing to say, and we need to be able to say this in a way which is convincing, which is why we need to be very careful about enlisting the state to support the church's goals. We have to be able to say to someone in a convincing manner, in a manner which is loving and which communicates our respect and our desire for that person and our desire to be loved by them and to enter into a mutually loving relationship, is that sometimes the greatest enemy of conscience is the person. A malformed conscience, to use a phrase from Catholic moral theology, is an even greater enemy of conscience than the coercive power of the state. St. John Chrysostom makes a similar point in one of his homilies, where he says, "No man can hurt me except that I first hurt myself." If I abuse my conscience and allow my conscience to become the excuse for harming other people, I harm myself. And I simply harm myself. So this willingness, or this eagerness, even sometimes I have to harm my own conscience, harm myself, really, is what the fathers of the church refer to as the passions. So let's look at those just for a moment, if we could, please. Because of sin, I'm not only coerced by external forces like the government or society, I'm also often coerced by my own desires. In my case, and this is one of my favorite examples, I love to use it when I'm lecturing to an evangelical Christian audience. I have a very disordered relationship with dark russet potato chips. You put a bag of dark russet potato chips in front of me, especially, the ruffled ones, I will eat the whole bag. And when I say I will eat the whole bag, I don't mean I will eat the whole snack bag. I will eat the whole party bag. I will eat the whole bag of those potato chips in one sitting. I'll do it knowing it's not good for my health, knowing I'm going to get an upset tummy. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it each and every single time. So the solution is I don't have dark russet potato chips in the house. And the reason for that, and this is kind of a trivial example, but it's a good one, is because I have a passion, an unhealthy desire for dark russet potato chips. I just become greedy and gluttonous. So doing that harms me. It harms me physically. It harms me morally. This is what we mean by the passions. It's those disordered tendencies that tear me to pieces and slowly rob me of my freedom to act. This is why, for the tradition of the church, negative freedom, even though it's foundational to a just social order, isn't enough for a fully human life, much less is it enough for a life of Christian holiness. Here we need to pause and for a moment about the difference between how the ancient world would have thought of human freedom and how the modern world thinks of it. The political commentator George F. Wills gets at this difference when he writes that for the classical age, not so much classical Christianity, not patristic so much as classical Greek philosophy, what is the highest good of which mankind is capable, and how do we pursue it? That's the question that drove much of Greek philosophical ethical thinking. What is the highest good that we are capable of achieving, and how do we get there? Beginning with the Enlightenment, especially, the question becomes not what is the greatest good toward we can achieve, but what is the worst that can happen, and how can we avoid it? Do you see the difference there? How is it that I can become my very best self, to use psychological language, as opposed to what are the different ways in which I can become my worst self? So it's a difference between sort of that positive approach of how do I become better tomorrow than I am today, and sort of the sort of the modernist approach, which is how do I avoid becoming worse tomorrow, or how do I avoid being worse today than I was yesterday? So it's two different orientations. The classical direct movement is upward, is transcendent, and the modernist, the contemporary view is often looking downward. And I see this frequently when I talk to my chaplain colleagues on campus, who are primarily Protestant clergy. They really are concerned with trying to keep people from becoming worse. And so a lot of my concerns as an Orthodox priest simply don't make sense to them. It never, I mean, it's just not something they're concerned about. From their point of view, we become better by not becoming worse. And from my point of view, we become better, well, by becoming better. To put it very directly. In any case, to get back to our lecture, asceticism reminds us in practical ways, prayer, fasting, sexual restraint, manual labor, care for the poor, almsgiving, that we can not be our best self unless we are first able to prevent being our worst self. In this, I think this is important. In Orthodox theology, Orthodox social ethics, our anthropology, our understanding of the person combines really the insight of both classical Greek philosophy, but also Enlightenment philosophy. We understand, yes, that we can become better, but we also understand that we can become much worse, and that we become better first and foremost by preventing ourselves from being worse. And this is repentance. Like I said, here in our ascetical tradition, we find the point of convergence between the life of the church and the demands of a life of civic involvement and self-government. And what I mean by that is this. I understand the different ways in which I fall into sin, and I repent of those, but I repent of those not simply because I feel bad for doing things which are wrong, but because I want to become a better person. I want to participate more fully in the life of God. And so our vision, we're always focusing on two things simultaneously. What are the ways in which we can become worse, and then what's the good that we can acquire. And so it's always this sort of back and forth. It's not one or the other. There's a lovely quote by Saint Maria of Paris that I think sort of summarizes this. The churching of life is the realization of the whole world as one great church adorned with icons, persons who should be venerated, honored, and loved, because these icons are true images of God that have the holiness of the living God within them. Christian asceticism is rooted in this holistic understanding of the human person as an icon of God. But it also takes seriously the human condition of being fallen, which is to say, an icon whose beauty is obscured. And so whether we're talking about ourself or our neighbor, the demand is exactly the same. That icon needs to be cleaned off. That beauty which is there needs to be brought to light by slowly, carefully, gently wiping away anything that obscures the beauty of the image. This is the ascetical life. And everything that we do to reveal the beauty of the person. And again, because we are not radical individualists, we understand that we can only reveal our own inner beauty to the degree that we actively participate in realizing the inner beauty, the true beauty of our neighbor. In one sense, the contradiction or maybe the paradox at the core of American culture is that we have to hold on to our individualism, and yet we need to be temperate in our individualism. We cannot allow our individualism to trap us in ourselves. But without that individualism, we lose the sense of the uniqueness of each person. And when we lose the uniqueness of each person, then we lose the possibility of the common good, because we become an undifferentiated mass. On the other hand, we do need to keep our focus on the common good, the fact that we have a shared life and that we are only our true self, our best self, together. So in a fallen world, there is always going to be a tension between what is unique in each of us as persons and what we share as human beings. Seeking to resolve this tension in favor of the former, ontological individualism, has taken hold of American culture, and this is an anthropological heresy. But we also need to acknowledge the current fad of post-liberalism that would erase human uniqueness in favor of some theoretical common good. And we see this frequently in the current presidential debates, whether it's immigration is the cause of all economic and social ills, or if abortion is going to be the magic solution to all of our problems, or LGBTQ rights. In both cases, we lose sight of the person in favor of some abstract theoretical good. So we want to be careful that we don't emphasize human uniqueness at the expense of the society, but we should not emphasize the society or the community at the expense of the individual. There needs to be these need to be held in tension with each other. And again, this is the sort of the central paradox of American culture. In one way that this has been resolved is with the idea of rugged individualism. And rugged individualism is different than the ontological individualism that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. It's a phrase first used by Herbert Hoover, President of the United States, beginning of the 20th century, in a campaign speech. He used the phrase rugged individualism to capture the tension between what is common and what is shared in human life. For Hoover and classical liberalism more broadly, the concern is to create a space for men and women to follow their conscience and to freely join together for common projects. These projects can be anything, starting an Orthodox parish in Northern Carolina, to attending seminary in New Jersey, or changing one's religious faith. But it can also include leading a scout troop, joining a bowling league, a labor union, or any number of other human communities, secular, religious, political, or cultural. In other words, behind rugged individualism is the sense that we need to remain free from external forces that would coerce us to join groups that we don't want to join, that would coerce us to violate our conscience. So there is something, again, fundamentally good about negative freedom. But the point for social ethics is that, like asceticism, negative freedom, at least in an American context, is not an end in itself. We have negative freedom so that we can pursue the good according as our conscience tells us, and so that we can pursue the good freely with others, like-minded individuals. Likewise, asceticism, the point is not fasting as an end in itself, but fasting to free me from the sinful desires of the body, or from the body's sinful desire, so that I'm free to do other things. In both cases, whether we're talking negative freedom or asceticism, we are trying to free ourselves to do, not only for ourselves, but other people, to do good. Here, I think the Greek moral theologian Christos Ioannaris is very helpful. Ioannaris says that what we've called ontological individualism is fundamentally a denial or neglect of the distinctiveness of the person. We see the consequences of this most clearly in how our concerns for individual rights have become a identity politics, which in turn serves the pursuit of some rationalistic arrangement for the rights of individuals, or an objective implementation of social justice that makes all individual beings alike and denies them their personal distinctiveness. I see this frequently on campus when I talk to students who are very much influenced by identity politics. They understand themselves not as a unique icon of God, but as a representative or an expression of an abstract social group, whether it's liberal, conservative, gay, straight, black, white, doesn't really matter. They take their identity from being a representative of some abstract social group. So this is really the anthropological heresy of our time. But American individualism as such is not intrinsically immoral, nor is it an anthropological heresy. Rather, it is simply an attempt to balance the demands of human uniqueness and our life together, because both of these need to be protected need to be protected if we are and encouraged if we are to live in a just society. Now, for all of America's real faults and sins, it is founded on, and until recently preserved, an ascetical intuition that had the ability to help Americans avoid the excesses of both the individualism of the Enlightenment and of pre-modern aristocratic authoritarianism. The Puritan work ethic, the U.S. Constitution separation of power, our bourgeois virtues, and our commitment to civil rights all reflect those aspects of American individualism that take seriously the need to correct what is worse in us, so that what is best in us can shine forth. Now, Americans are by no stretch of the imagination monastics, but we are, in our way, and when we are our best selves, an ascetical people who understand that a healthy civic, political, and religious community life depends on self-restraint. In this, the often and unfairly maligned American character or ethos of rugged individualism finds a natural partner in the social ethos of the Orthodox Church. It does so not as a statement of ontological individualism, but an affirmation of both human freedom and the moral requirement that social institutions, including the church, do not simply respect and support the person, but restrain themselves so as not to infringe on human freedom. We read an expression of this, the ascetical character of the American character, in the Article 1, Section 15 of the Constitution of Virginia. No free government which says that no free government nor the blessing of liberty can be preserved to any people but by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue, by frequent recurrence to fundamental principles, and by the recognition that all citizens that they have duties as well as rights, and that such rights cannot be enjoyed save in a society where law is respected and due process is observed. In other words, we do not have a free and just society. We do not live in a rightly ordered society unless we have a shared commitment to not only doing good, but being good. So let's go back as we're by way of conclusion to For the Life of the World and the basis of the social concept. Both the basis and For the Life of the World identify important matters of social concern to the church. What they fail to do is ask hard questions. And these are hard questions, not only because they're difficult to answer, but because they also require the church as an institution and each of us as Christians to reflect very seriously on our own lives in light of the gospel. What are these questions? Well, let me give you three. How do we bring the non-believer to faith in Christ? If the church has lost authority and influence in society because of apostasy, then the solution is to call the non-believer to faith in Jesus Christ. And we have to do that in a way that's effective and or credible. And if we're suffering in an age in which Orthodox Christians are abandoning the faith, and by the way, that's a problem here in America as well. We lose 60% of the children baptized in infancy. We lose about half our converts. Only maybe one in three of us is going to be a liturgy on Sunday, and maybe only half of us are going to go to Holy Communion. So how do we reconcile the lapsed or the indifferent Orthodox Christian to Christ and his church? And turning to the base For the Life of the World, how do we help the greedy business owner learn to make a profit while also caring for his employees as his brothers and sisters in Christ? These are all hard questions. And the fact that we don't ask them in these documents is not to our credit. If we do ask them, then we discover all the different ways in which we are not being, to go back to something I said earlier, our best self. We're being our worst self in these issues. We're not asking us the question of how do we reconcile people to Christ and the church so the good things that we're looking for can come about as the natural fruit of conversion and an active Orthodox faith. Instead, what both documents do is ask the state to intervene to secure what is objectively a desirable outcome. But in doing that, they leave unspoken the church's obligation to foster virtuous men and women of faith. Why is this a problem? I shouldn't even have to ask, but let me explain. Few people writes Elizabeth Anscombe, the moral philosopher. Few people have authority over everyone they need to do to get things, and few people either have power to hurt or help others without damage themselves, or command affection from others to such an extent as to be able to get them to do the things they need others to do. Those who have extensive authority and power cannot exercise it to get all the other people to do the things that meet their mutual requirements. Well, besides the fact that that's a long quote, and it's worth maybe looking up and reading it in context if you have time. But besides the fact that we aren't called by Christ simply to do good, but to be good, that is to share in the divine nature, we can't force other people to do the right thing without doing moral damage to them and consequently to ourselves. In fact, I can't force you to do the good thing unless I've already inflicted a great deal of harm on myself. Or, and I'll leave you with this, as Anscombe put it, in the final analysis, we are simply powerless to compel others to do good. So this is really where our creation of a rightly ordered society begins, with the understanding that we cannot compel people. We can't force people to be good. The only thing we can do is, as we mentioned in our last video chat, is basically to woo them, to present them with a way of life which is sufficiently attractive so that they want themselves to do the good. All right, I'm going to stop here for now. I went a little bit longer than I expected, but that's okay. You're charitable and forgiving. All right, that's it for now, and I'm looking forward to talking to you on November 9th. Please, if get your essays to me sooner rather than later. And I think there are 5 for the semester, and I know it's kind of it's an ambiguous assignment. But part of the reason for that ambiguous assignment is that in parish life, as pastors, we've got to just generate content. We have to be able to look at something which is long and sometimes abstract and think, how can I express that? What can I do with this? How can I communicate this to my congregation in a way that is sensible? So that those essays actually serve not only the purpose of seeing how well you understand the church's social ethic, but it also is preparing you, to be teachers in your own community. All right, I'm going to stop here and talk to you later. Take care. God bless you all. Bye-bye.